I never thought I'd become the kind of person who destroys something beautiful just because she was too weak to protect it. But here I am, sitting alone in an apartment that still smells faintly of the cologne he used to wear, staring at a phone that no longer lights up with his name, and wondering how I managed to take the one person who truly loved me and turn him into a stranger who can't even look me in the eye anymore. This is my confession. Not because I deserve forgiveness. I don't, but because I need to say it out loud. I need to let the truth breathe, even if it chokes me. My name is Sophie, and I cheated on my boyfriend. Not once in a moment of weakness. Not in some drunken blur I could pretend to forget. I cheated deliberately, repeatedly, and with full knowledge of what I was doing. And then I lied. I lied so much that I stopped recognizing my own face in the mirror. I became someone I despised. And by the time the truth came out, I'd already lost everything. Not just him, but myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the version of me that still believed she was a good person. I met Daniel when I was 25. It was at a friend's birthday party, one of those gatherings where half the people don't know the other half and everyone's pretending to have more fun than they actually are. I was standing by the kitchen island, nursing a glass of wine I didn't really want, when he walked over and asked if I'd tried the spinach dip. That was it. That was his opening line, spinach dip. Spinach. And I laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one. Because there was something about the way he said it, completely unbothered by how ridiculous it sounded, that made me feel like I could exhale for the first time all night. We talked for 3 hours. About everything. About nothing. About the weird pressure of being in your mid-20s and feeling like you're supposed to have your life figured out when you can barely remember to water your plants. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. And when he asked for my number at the end of the night, I gave it to him without hesitation. Our first date was a disaster in the best possible way. He took me to a Thai restaurant that turned out to be closed for renovations, so we ended up eating gas station sandwiches on a bench by the river, watching the sun set over the water. He told me about his job as a software developer, about his dream of one day building something that actually helped people, about the way his mom still called him every Sunday morning just to make sure he was eating enough vegetables. And I told him things I hadn't told anyone. About my parents' divorce when I was 12. About the way I always felt like I was performing a version of myself instead of just being. About my fear that I'd never be enough for anyone. Not really. He listened. He didn't try to fix me or offer empty reassurances. He just listened. And when I was done, he looked at me with those warm brown eyes and said, "You're already enough, Sophie. You just don't know it yet. Just don't know." I fell in love with him that night. I didn't say it. It would be months before either of us said those words, but I felt it. That terrifying, exhilarating free fall of realizing that someone has the power to break you and choosing to trust them anyway. We moved in together after a year. It was a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood with creaky floors and a kitchen so narrow we could barely cook together without bumping elbows. But it was ours. We painted the walls a soft gray. We adopted a cat named Oliver, who had a perpetually grumpy expression but purred like a motorboat whenever Daniel scratched behind his ears. We built a life. And for a while, it was perfect, or as close to perfect as real life ever gets. Daniel was patient in ways I didn't deserve. When my anxiety spiraled, he'd sit with me until I could breathe again. When I picked fights over nothing because I was stressed about work, he'd wait for the storm to pass and then gently ask what was really going on. He never raised his voice, never made me feel small. He was the kind of partner I'd spent my whole life hoping existed, and somehow he'd chosen me. So why did I throw it all away? That's the question I've asked myself 1,000 times. And the honest answer is that I still don't fully understand it. All I know is that something inside me was broken, something that no amount of love could fix. And instead of working on it, instead of being honest about my demons, I let them drive me straight into destruction. His name was Marcus. He worked at the same marketing firm as me, 2 floors up in the creative department. I'd seen him around for months before we ever really spoke. Tall, dark hair that always looked artfully messy. The kind of confidence that seemed effortless, like he'd never doubted himself a day in his life. Our first real conversation happened in the break room on a Tuesday afternoon. I was struggling with the coffee machine, which had decided to malfunction in increasingly creative ways, and he walked in just as I was about to give up entirely. The trick is to hit it twice on the left side, he said, demonstrating with a casual tap that somehow made the machine spring to life. It's temperamental, like a cat. I have a cat, I said without thinking. He's definitely temperamental. He smiled. What's his name? Oliver? Like the orphan? Like the musical. He laughed, and something in my chest flickered. Not love. Not even attraction exactly. More like recognition. Like looking into a mirror and seeing a distorted reflection of yourself staring back. We started talking more after that. Coffee breaks that stretched a few minutes longer than they should have. Lunch meetings that weren't really about work. He was charming in a way that Daniel wasn't. Sharp-edged and unpredictable. He made me feel like I was playing a game I didn't quite understand the rules to, and for some reason, I found that thrilling instead of terrifying. I told myself it was innocent. We were just colleagues, just friends. The fact that my heart beat a little faster when I saw his name pop up on my phone meant nothing. The fact that I started wearing nicer clothes to work, started putting on makeup I normally wouldn't bother with, meant nothing. The fact that I didn't mention him to Daniel meant nothing. That's what I told myself. And for a while, I almost believed it. The first time something actually happened was at the company holiday party. It was December, cold enough that my breath fogged in the air when I stepped outside for some fresh air. The party was loud and crowded, and I'd had 2 glasses of champagne, just enough to make everything feel slightly fuzzy around the edges. Marcus followed me outside. I don't know if he planned it or if it was coincidence. What I do know is that when he appeared beside me on that empty balcony, I didn't tell him to leave. Needed to escape? He asked. Something like that. We stood in silence for a moment, looking out at the city lights glittering below. And then he turned to me, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Something that made my stomach drop. Can I tell you something? He said. Sure. I've been thinking about you a lot, more than I should. I should have walked away. I should have told him I had a boyfriend, that I was happy, that whatever he was feeling wasn't reciprocated. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen, as he stepped closer. I know you're with someone, he said, and I know this is complicated, but I can't stop thinking about what it would be like to kiss you. The smart thing would have been to say no. The right thing would have been to say no. But in that moment, standing in the cold with champagne buzzing through my veins, and this man looking at me like I was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen, I didn't want to be smart or right. I wanted to feel something other than the low-grade anxiety that had been humming beneath my skin for months. I wanted to feel wanted in a way that felt new and electric and dangerous. So when he kissed me, I kissed him back. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, maybe less. And then reality came crashing back in, and I pulled away, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I have to go, I said. Sophie, wait. But I was already walking back inside, pushing through the crowd, grabbing my coat and leaving without saying goodbye to anyone. I called an Uber and sat in the back seat with my hands shaking, telling myself it was just a kiss. It didn't mean anything. I could pretend it never happened and everything would be fine. When I got home, Daniel was asleep on the couch, the TV still playing some documentary about ocean life. Oliver was curled up on his chest, and the sight of them together, so peaceful and unaware, made something twist painfully in my gut. I should have woken him up and told him everything. I should have confessed right then, when the betrayal was still small enough to maybe survive. But I was a coward. So I turned off the TV, covered him with a blanket, and went to bed, where I lay awake for hours, replaying those 10 seconds over and over until I thought I might go insane. The next morning, I told myself it was over. A momentary lapse in judgment. A mistake I would never repeat. I avoided Marcus at work, taking different routes to the bathroom, eating lunch at my desk, leaving exactly at 5, before anyone could stop me for conversation. I threw myself into being the perfect girlfriend, cooking Daniel's favorite meals, suggesting weekend trips, initiating intimacy I hadn't been interested in for months. But the problem with trying to outrun your guilt is that it's already inside you. No matter how fast you move, you can't escape something that lives in your bones. 2 weeks later, Marcus sent me a text. Nothing incriminating, just a simple, "Hope you're okay. I've been thinking about you. I should have ignored it. I should have deleted his number and blocked him and moved on with my life, but I didn't." I read that message a dozen times, turning each word over like a stone, looking for hidden meanings. And then, before I could talk myself out of it, I replied, "I'm okay. Just needed some space to think." His response came within minutes. "I understand, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here." That was how it started. Slowly at first. Careful, cautious messages that stayed just on the right side of appropriate. We'd text about work, about movies, about nothing at all. And every time my phone buzzed with his name, I felt that same flutter of excitement, followed immediately by a wave of shame so strong it made me nauseous. I told myself it was harmless. We were just talking, nothing was happening. The fact that I was hiding these conversations from Daniel, deleting messages before I went home, creating a separate folder on my phone labeled work stuff where I stored our chat history, that was just practicality. There was nothing to confess because there was nothing going on. That's what I told myself. And for a while, I almost believed it. The second kiss happened a month later. This time there was no champagne to blame, no holiday party atmosphere to excuse it. We were working late on a project, just the two of us in a conference room with takeout containers scattered across the table and the city dark and quiet outside the windows. I don't remember who made the first move that time. What I remember is the feeling of his hands in my hair, the taste of his mouth, the way my entire body seemed to come alive in a way it hadn't in months. I remember thinking this is wrong over and over again like a mantra, but my hands didn't stop, my lips didn't pull away, and when he pressed me against the conference room wall, I let him. We didn't go further than kissing that night. Some small shred of my conscience still had enough power to make me stop before things crossed into truly unforgivable territory. But I walked out of that building knowing I had become someone I never thought I'd be. I had become the kind of woman who cheated, the kind of woman who lied, the kind of woman who looked her boyfriend in the eyes and smiled while her lips still tasted like another man. Driving home that night, I made myself a promise. I would end things with Marcus. I would recommit to Daniel. I would work on whatever brokenness inside me had led me to this point. I would become the person he thought I was. But promises made to yourself at midnight have a way of dissolving by morning. And when Marcus texted me the next day asking if I was okay, I found myself responding. And when he suggested we meet for coffee to talk about what happened, I found myself saying yes. And when that coffee turned into dinner, and that dinner turned into drinks, and those drinks turned into a hotel room 2 blocks from the office, I found myself crossing every line I'd sworn I never would. The affair, if I'm being honest about what it was, lasted 4 months. 4 months of secret meetings and burner phone apps and elaborate lies about work emergencies and client dinners that went late. 4 months of living. 2 lives that should have been incompatible but somehow coexisted in a constant state of anxiety-laced exhilaration. I became an expert at compartmentalization. At home, I was Sophie, the devoted girlfriend, the woman who cooked dinner and watched movies on the couch and talked about maybe getting a second cat. At work, I was someone else entirely. Someone confident and reckless and utterly unmoored from the values I'd once thought were fundamental to who I was. The cognitive dissonance should have been unbearable, and in many ways, it was. I stopped sleeping properly, lying awake at night, replaying every lie I'd told that day, calculating the probability of being caught. I lost weight because my appetite had vanished, replaced by a constant low-grade nausea that never quite went away. I started getting headaches that no amount of ibuprofen could touch. But there was also a part of me that felt more alive than I had in years. A part that craved the danger, the secrecy, the feeling of being wanted by 2 different people in 2 different ways. Marcus made me feel desirable in a way that Daniel's steady, reliable love never had. With Daniel, I was known. With Marcus, I was mysterious. And in my broken, insecure mind, mystery felt more valuable than intimacy. I know how that sounds. I know it makes me seem shallow and selfish and fundamentally unworthy of love. And maybe that's exactly what I was. Maybe that's exactly what I still am. What I can tell you is that living a lie does something to your soul. It's like a slow poison, seeping into every part of you until you can't remember what it felt like to be whole. Every time I lied to Daniel, a piece of me died. Every time I looked at his trusting face and fed him another story about where I'd been or why I was late, I felt myself becoming smaller, harder, more hollow. And the worst part, he never suspected a thing. Daniel was so completely, beautifully, devastatingly trusting that it never occurred to him I might be deceiving him. When I said I had to work late, he believed me. When I said my phone died, he believed me. When I seemed distracted or distant, he assumed it was work stress and offered massages and cups of tea and all the small gestures of care that made me love him and hate myself in equal measure. Sometimes I would watch him sleeping beside me and feel a grief so overwhelming it took my breath away. Grief for the relationship we used to have. Grief for the person I used to be. Grief for the future we'd talked about, the marriage and the house and the children, all of it slipping further away with every secret I kept. But I didn't stop. That's the thing about affairs, about lies, about self-destruction. It's not one big choice. It's a thousand small ones, each making the next a little easier, each pulling you a little further from the person you wanted to be. The beginning of the end came on a Sunday in March. Daniel and I had plans to visit his parents, a 2-hour drive to their house in the countryside, the kind of low-key family day I would normally have dreaded, but now felt desperate for. I wanted to remember what normal felt like. I wanted to play the role of devoted girlfriend with an audience that wasn't just Daniel, as if performing for his parents might somehow make me feel real again. We were 20 minutes into the drive when my phone buzzed. I'd put it in my purse on silent, like I always did when I was with Daniel. But the vibration was unmistakable, and I saw his eyes flick to my bag for just a second. "You can check it," he said. "Might be important." "It's probably just spam," I said too quickly. He glanced at me, a small crease forming between his eyebrows. And in that moment, something shifted. I saw it happen. A flicker of doubt crossing his face. So brief I might have imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. "You've been getting a lot of spam lately," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Yeah, I signed up for some newsletter and they sold my information or something. It's annoying." He nodded, turning back to the road. But the crease between his eyebrows didn't quite smooth out. And for the rest of the drive, there was a tension in the car that hadn't been there before. A silence that felt charged with something unspoken. His parents' house was warm and welcoming, filled with the smell of roast chicken and his mother's famous apple pie. I smiled and hugged and made small talk about work and the apartment and Oliver's latest antics. But underneath, I was spiraling. That look on Daniel's face, that moment of doubt. It played on loop in my mind, making it hard to focus on anything else. When we got home that night, Daniel was quiet. Not angry or accusatory, just quiet in a way that felt different from his usual introversion. He went to bed early, citing a headache, and I sat alone on the couch with Oliver purring in my lap, wondering if this was the beginning of the end. The next morning, I woke to find him already gone. Not unusual, he often went to the gym before work, but there was something missing from his note on the kitchen counter. The usual "love you" was absent, replaced by a simple "have a good day." Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe the stress and guilt were making me paranoid, but something in my gut told me that the careful construction I'd built was starting to crack. I should have used that moment to end things, to end the affair, to confess to Daniel, to face the consequences before they could grow any larger. But I was a coward. So instead, I did what I'd become so skilled at doing. I pushed the fear down and carried on as if nothing was wrong. That night, Marcus and I had plans to meet at our usual hotel, a boutique place downtown, expensive enough that we were unlikely to run into anyone we knew. I'd told Daniel I had a work dinner, a client from out of town who wanted to discuss a new campaign. He'd nodded without looking up from his laptop, and something about his disengagement made my chest tighten. I almost canceled. I typed out the text to Marcus a dozen times, but in the end, I went. Because by that point, the affair had become its own kind of addiction. And like any addict, I'd lost the ability to stop even when I could see the destruction coming. Marcus was already in the room when I arrived. A bottle of wine open on the nightstand, soft music playing from his phone. He smiled when he saw me, that easy, confident smile that had hooked me in the first place. "You look tense," he said, pulling me into his arms. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Talk to me." And so I did. I told him about the moment in the car, about Daniel's unusual quiet, about the creeping fear that I was about to lose everything. I said it all out loud, the words tumbling out in a rush of anxiety and confession. Marcus listened, and then he said something that should have made me run screaming from that hotel room. Maybe it would be better if he found out. I pulled back, staring at him. "What?" "Think about it, Sophie. You're exhausted. You're scared all the time. You're living a double life that's eating you alive. Maybe if it all came out, you'd finally be free." "Free to do what? Destroy my relationship? Break his heart?" "Free to be honest. Free to figure out what you actually want." "I know what I want," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure they were true. "Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you want two different lives that can't exist at the same time." I didn't have an answer for that because he was right. For 4 months, I'd been trying to have it both ways, to keep the safety and stability of Daniel while indulging in the excitement and escape of Marcus. And it was never going to be sustainable. Something was going to break. The only question was what? I left the hotel early that night, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely fake. And as I drove home through streets slick with spring rain, I made a decision. I was going to end things with Marcus. Not tomorrow, not next week, but now. I would call him when I got home and tell him it was over. And then I would figure out whether to tell Daniel the truth or bury it forever and spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I'd done. But when I walked into the apartment, all those plans evaporated because Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, my laptop open in front of him, and the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. He'd found the messages, not on my phone, which I'd been so careful to protect, on my laptop, which I'd stupidly left logged into the secondary messaging app Marcus and I used. I'd been so focused on securing my phone that I'd forgotten about the backup I'd enabled months ago, the one that synced all my conversations across devices. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain against the windows and Oliver meowing somewhere in the other room, oblivious to the world falling apart around us. "How long?" Daniel's voice was flat, empty of any emotion I could read. "Daniel, How long?" I sank into the chair across from him, my legs no longer able to support me. 4 months. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, I saw something I'd never seen in him before. A coldness, a complete and total withdrawal of the warmth that had always defined him. 4 months, he repeated. 4 months of lies. 4 months of coming home to me and pretending everything was fine. 4 months of making me believe. His voice broke. And in that crack, I heard the sound of everything we'd built together shattering into a million pieces. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're sorry." 4 months, Sophie. 4 months of reading those messages, those things you said to him, the things he said to you, and you're sorry? I don't know what else to say. There's nothing else to say. There's nothing you could possibly say that would make this okay. He stood up, pushing back from the table with a force that made me flinch. And then he walked to the bedroom, and I heard him pulling out suitcases, opening drawers, the sounds of a life being dismantled. I sat frozen at that table for what felt like hours. Maybe it was minutes. Time had lost all meaning. All I could do was listen to the sounds of him packing, each zip and thud a reminder of everything I'd thrown away. When he emerged, he had 2 bags slung over his shoulders. His face was red, his eyes swollen. He'd been crying in there, alone, while I sat paralyzed and useless in the kitchen. "I'm staying at my parents' for now," he said, his voice steadier than I expected. "I need time to process this. I need to be away from you." "Daniel, please, can we talk about this? Can we—" "No." The word was final, absolute. "We can't. Not now. Maybe not ever. I don't know." All I know is that I can't look at you right now without seeing him, without seeing all of it, and I can't live like that. He walked to the door and I followed him, desperate, reaching for his arm. Please don't go. Please. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job. He turned to face me, and the tears streaming down his face broke something inside me that I didn't know could still break. I loved you, Sophie. I loved you so much. I was going to propose next month. I had a ring. I had a whole plan. And you threw it all away for him. For what? For excitement? For something new? Was I really that boring? Was loving me really that unbearable? I had no answer. Because every possible response felt like another lie, and I'd already told too many of those. He left without another word. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that felt louder than any slam could have. And I stood there in the empty apartment, surrounded by the life we'd built together, and finally let myself fall apart. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain and confusion, and a grief so overwhelming it felt physical. I called in sick to work for a week, unable to face the office where Marcus still worked, where everyone would eventually learn what I'd done. I stopped eating. I barely slept. I sat on the couch with Oliver curled against me, staring at nothing, replaying every moment of the past 4 months and wondering how I'd become this person. Marcus texted me repeatedly at first, then called, then showed up at my door one night, concerned when I hadn't responded to any of his messages. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Looking at him felt like looking at the physical manifestation of my worst decisions, and I couldn't stomach it. Eventually, the texts stopped. I heard through work gossip that he'd requested a transfer to a different office, that he'd started seeing someone new. The speed with which he moved on confirmed what some part of me had always known. I was never special to him. I was just an adventure, an escape from his own boredom. And I'd sacrificed everything for it. Daniel and I met for coffee 3 weeks after he left. His idea, not mine. I barely recognized him when he walked into the cafe. He'd lost weight. There were dark circles under his eyes. But there was also a composure about him that I envied. A quiet dignity that made my own chaotic state feel even more shameful. I'm not here to get back together, he said before I could even speak. I want to be clear about that. Okay. My voice came out as a whisper. I just needed to understand. I've been going over and over it in my head, trying to figure out what I did wrong, what I missed, why I wasn't enough. You didn't do anything wrong, I said, the words catching in my throat. You were perfect. You were always perfect. This wasn't about you. Then what was it about? Help me understand, Sophie, because I've been driving myself crazy trying to make sense of it. And so I told him the truth. All of it. Not just the affair, but everything that had led up to it. The insecurity that had lived inside me for as long as I could remember. The fear that I was fundamentally unworthy of love, that anyone who got too close would eventually see through me and leave. The way his consistent, reliable love had paradoxically made me more anxious, not less, because it felt like something I'd have to work to deserve every single day. I told him about the thrill of Marcus's attention, how it had felt like validation, in a way that required nothing from me, how the secrecy and danger had made me feel powerful instead of powerless, how I'd become addicted to the high, even as I watched it destroy everything I claimed to care about. I told him about the guilt that had eaten me alive, about the moments I'd come so close to confessing but couldn't find the courage, about the way I'd lost myself so completely in the lie that I'd forgotten what truth even felt like. He listened to all of it, and when I was done, he was quiet for a long time. I appreciate you being honest with me now, he finally said. It doesn't change anything, but I appreciate it. I know it doesn't change anything. I know I destroyed us. I needed you to know that it was never about you not being enough. You were always enough. I was the one who wasn't. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that wasn't anger or hatred or even sadness. It was pity. And somehow, that was worse than any of the alternatives. I hope you get help, Sophie, he said softly. I mean that. Whatever is broken inside you that made you do this, I hope you find a way to fix it. Not for me. For yourself. He stood up, placed some money on the table for the coffees neither of us had touched, and walked out of the cafe, out of my life, forever. I sat there for another hour, watching the rain streak down the windows, letting his words sink in. Whatever is broken inside you. He was right. Something was broken. Had been broken for as long as I could remember. And instead of addressing it, instead of doing the hard work of healing, I'd let it drive me to destroy the best thing I'd ever had. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. I started therapy finally with a woman named Dr. Reeves, who specialized in attachment disorders and self destructive patterns. Session by session, we unpacked the tangled mess of my psyche, the childhood trauma I'd never fully processed, the core belief that I was fundamentally unlovable that had twisted every relationship I'd ever had, the self sabotage that had become so ingrained I didn't even recognize it anymore. It was painful work. There were sessions where I cried so hard I couldn't breathe, sessions where I sat in silence, unable to articulate the shame that was choking me, sessions where I wanted to quit, to run away from the discomfort of examining myself with such brutal honesty. But I stayed. For the first time in my life, I stayed with something hard instead of running from it, because I'd finally understood that running was what had gotten me here in the first place. Running from intimacy, running from vulnerability, running from the terrifying possibility that someone might love me enough to see all my flaws and stay anyway. I quit my job at the marketing firm, partly because I couldn't bear to be in the same building where the affair had happened, partly because I needed a fresh start, a chance to be someone different than the person I'd become in those hallways. I took a few months off, living off savings that wouldn't last forever but were enough to give me breathing room. I reached out to friends I'd neglected during the affair, people I'd pushed away because maintaining those relationships required honesty I didn't have the capacity for. Some of them welcomed me back, others didn't. And I learned to accept both responses as valid consequences of my actions. I adopted a second cat, a scraggly gray thing from the shelter that no one else wanted because she was old and had health problems and wasn't cute enough for Instagram. I named her Grace because that's what I was trying to learn to give myself. Not forgiveness, not yet, but grace. The understanding that I was human, that I'd made terrible choices, and that those choices didn't have to define the rest of my life. A year after Daniel left, I ran into him at a farmer's market. He was with someone new, a woman with kind eyes and an easy laugh, and my first instinct was to turn and run before he could see me, but I didn't. I walked over, heart pounding, and said hello. The conversation was brief and awkward. He introduced me to Sarah, his girlfriend, and I smiled and said it was nice to meet her even though every cell in my body was screaming with loss. He looked good, healthy, happy, in a way he hadn't been in those last months with me. "You look well," he said, and I couldn't tell if he meant it or was just being polite. "I'm working on it," I replied. "Therapy, a lot of therapy." He nodded, a flicker of something crossing his face that might have been approval or might have been pity. "I'm glad, Sophie. Really." And then they walked away, Sarah's hand in his, and I stood there among the vegetables and artisanal bread, letting the grief wash over me one last time. Because watching him move on, watching him build a life with someone else, was the final confirmation that what I'd done was real. That I had really lost him. That there was no going back, no second chance, no redemption arc that would lead us back to each other. That night, I called Dr. Reeves and told her everything. The encounter, the feelings, the way seeing him happy had hurt and healed at the same time. "What do you think that means?" she asked. "I think it means I loved him more than I ever let myself admit. And I think it means I'm finally starting to accept that loving someone doesn't entitle you to them. Not when you've betrayed their trust so completely." "And how does that acceptance feel?" I thought about it for a long moment. "Like growing up," I finally said. "It feels like finally growing up." That was 2 years ago. I'm 30 now. I live in a different apartment, in a different neighborhood, in what feels like a different life. I have a new job at a nonprofit, work that feels meaningful in ways marketing never did. I have friends who know the truth about what I did and choose to stay in my life anyway. I have Grace and Oliver, My mismatched cats who tolerate each other most days and occasionally curl up together in patches of sunlight. I don't have a boyfriend. I've dated tentatively, but every time things start to get serious, I find myself pulling back. Not out of fear exactly, more out of a need to make sure I've truly changed before I ask someone else to trust me with their heart. Because here's what I've learned from all of this: trust is not a right, it's a gift. And when you betray someone's trust, you don't just damage them, you damage yourself. You damage your own capacity to believe in love, in connection, in the possibility of being truly known by another person. I spent months after the affair questioning whether I was even capable of love, whether my feelings for Daniel had been real or just another performance, another role I was playing. But therapy helped me understand that the love was real. The problem wasn't a lack of love, it was a lack of self worth so profound that I couldn't accept being loved, couldn't believe I deserved it, couldn't tolerate the vulnerability that came with letting someone see me completely. Marcus was never about Marcus. He was about escape, about distraction, about numbing the constant low grade terror of being in a real relationship with someone who actually knew me. With him, I could be a fantasy version of myself. With Daniel, I had to be real. And that reality was too frightening for the broken person I was then to handle. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive myself for what I did. Dr. Reeves says forgiveness isn't the goal anyway. The goal is understanding, integration, learning to hold all the parts of yourself, including the parts you're ashamed of, with some measure of compassion, not excusing the behavior, but understanding the wounds that drove it. Some days, I believe I'm making progress. I'll catch myself being honest in moments where old Sophie would have lied. I'll notice an impulse to self sabotage and choose differently. I'll sit with discomfort instead of running from it and feel something like pride in that small victory. Other days, the shame is as fresh as it was that first night, when I stood in the empty apartment and listened to the silence where Daniel used to be. Those days are harder, but they're also fewer, and the space between them keeps growing. I think about Daniel sometimes. Wonder if he's still with Sarah, if they're married now, if they have the life he once planned with me. I hope he's happy. I hope he found someone worthy of the love he gave so freely. I hope he's learned to trust again, that what I did hasn't made him cautious and guarded in the way it could so easily have done. And I hope someday that I'll be the kind of person who deserves that same kind of love, who can receive it without trying to destroy it, who can be vulnerable without being terrified, who can look at herself in the mirror and see someone she's proud of, not just someone she's working on becoming. This is my confession, not a plea for sympathy or understanding, not an attempt to justify what can't be justified, just the truth. All of it. The ugly, uncomfortable, inescapable truth of who I was and what I did. I cheated on my boyfriend. I lied to him every day for 4 months. I broke his heart and shattered his trust and threw away a future that could have been beautiful. And then I lost myself so completely in the lie that I forgot who I was without it. But here's the thing about losing yourself: it gives you the chance to find yourself again, to build from the rubble, to become someone new, someone better, someone more honest than the person you were before. That's what I'm trying to do now, not because I deserve redemption, but because the alternative, staying lost, staying broken, staying the person who could do what I did, that's not a life worth living. So I keep going, one day at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one small choice at a time. And maybe someday I'll look back at this chapter of my life and see it not as the thing that defined me, but as the thing that finally woke me up. Until then, I sit with the truth. I carry the weight of what I did, and I try every single day to be someone I wouldn't have to lie about. That's all any of us can do, really. Tell the truth, face the consequences, and keep moving forward. Even when the road is long, even when the weight is heavy, even when the mirror still shows someone you're not sure you can trust, you keep moving forward, because that's the only direction that leads somewhere new. And I'm ready for somewhere new. I'm ready to be someone new, not someone who never made mistakes, but someone who learned from them, someone who can look at her own darkness and choose the light anyway. That's the ending I'm writing for myself. Not a fairy tale. Not a redemption arc tied up with a neat bow. Just the quiet, ongoing work of becoming human, of accepting my flaws, of trying to be better than I was yesterday. It's not much, but it's honest. And after everything, that's the only thing I have left to give. The truth. Finally, the truth.